It's the 1223rd day of the war. Trump asked the authors of the law on punitive sanctions against Russia to start considering it. One of his co-authors, Lindsey Graham, reported on this. He said that he played golf with Trump, where he urged him to start moving with this bill. Meanwhile, Russia continues to deteriorate relations with its surrounding countries. Now, a giant scandal is spreading between Azerbaijan and the RF. In Baku and other cities of the country, all events of Russian artists and all mutual meetings and trips were cancelled. And on the state television, it is told that the RF behaves like Germany in the 1930s. All this is connected with the raid of Russian security forces in Yekaterinburg, where they beat up and tortured Azerbaijanis. According to some media, even 2 people were killed. At the same time, the triumph of Russia, China, and Iran turned out to be a blank, writes Atlantic. The war between Israel and Iran has shown that there is no reliable connection to the new axis of evil, and each of these countries acts only for their own benefit without trying to protect their partners. Kadyrov's image marked the wedding with a wave. He rode an elementary series of Jelliak shot from Stichkino into the air and whistled for many millions of dollars for hours. It's unlikely to surprise anyone, but I remind you that in fact, this is the son of the regional leader and one of the poorest and most dated regions. If your city does not have a hospital, kindergarten, roads, sewage, and so on, remember that the budget funds went not only to the aggressive war, which is disgusting, but also to Jelliak, a watch and other joys for the son of the Chechen king. In the Soviet Union, 2 Cameroonians fighting for the Russian Federation were captured. They told that they were deceived and dragged into the Russian army. There are a lot of such stories, especially from people from Africa who come to the Russian Federation for earnings or training. Russian military showed the conditions in which they live before sending to the front. Barrels on the windows, bars on the doors, mattresses on the floor, a bucket of urine instead of a toilet. New elite, where to go? About this and much more in today's fresh summary, which you can support with your like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your subscriptions are especially important. They are the most important indicators for YouTube algorithms. But you can support the channel financially on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. And by buying NVPN, this is a means of bypassing blockages, which allows you to bypass blockages. YouTube is already slow in Russia, Twitter is blocked, Instagram is blocked, a huge number of publications, Discord, problems with servers and games. And then everything will only deteriorate. There are constant rumors that from September to October they will start to slow down or even block Telegram because Russia is making its state messenger. In short, for a normal existence on the internet, you need a VPN in any case. Well, if you want your VPN to not only work well and high quality, which I personally guarantee, this is my VPN, but at the same time, the funds that you pay for it went to the support of this channel and the release of content here. Then buy a VPN at the link in the description. Ruble, dollars, euros, cryptocurrency, everything is available for payment. Well, use a VPN and buy it in Russia while legally allowed. In general, the link is in the description. And we move on to what happened in the past day. The co-author of the law on bone-crushing sanctions against Russia said that Trump approved this bill. According to him, this happened during their golf games. Here is what he said in the ABC News interview. We have a big breakthrough. We played golf. And yesterday, for the first time, President Trump said to me, it's time to move forward with your bill about 500% sanctions on all countries trading with Russia, with the exception of those who provide help to Ukraine. I already have 84 senators who are ready to vote for the Sonakono project, he said. Well, a month ago there were somewhere 82. There are only 100 of them. In any case, this is enough. After the July break, we will accept the draft law. Yes, I think we are in a good position, said Lindsey Graham in this interview. After the July break, I mean the first days of July. Beautily, for example, writes about July 7. That's when the Congress break ends. Well, let's see. Doesn't mean that I touched on it. Firstly, Graham could incorrectly interpret the words of Trump. Secondly, Trump can change his mind at any moment. Thirdly, how will this bill work? This is also a big question. But in any case, we see a number of signals that Trump is changing his attitude towards interaction with Russia. For how long is this, or until the next call to Putin, the question is open. However, of course, this movement is positive. And we will hope that it is exactly in this testosterone direction that Trump will move further, becoming more and more a classic Republican ostrich instead of the magic rag that he represents. The imbeciles that he has gathered around him on all important posts. However, there are also other messages from America, so that life does not seem like honey. The United States has removed the sanctions from the expansion project of the Hungarian ASPAKS2, in which the Russian Rosatom participates. Head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Hungary, Peter Sayert, said said that the sanctions were still in place during the presidency of Biden, and they made it difficult to continue construction. This is about the sanctions against Gazprom Bank through which the project was financed. Now transactions are possible again. ASPAKS-2 is one of the largest energy projects in Eastern Europe, completely tied to Russian technology and supply. It provides for the construction of 2 new energy units launched in the 1980s by the PAKS station, and large components for the station are made in Russia and France. Documents on the construction of the 5th and 6th energy units in Russia and Hungary were signed back in 2014. But with other partners in Russia, relations are getting worse. The scandal between Russia and Azerbaijan is gaining momentum. Actions of action from Baku are getting tougher and tougher. The delegation of Mejlis Azerbaijan, headed by the first Vice Speaker Ali Kadyrov, will not take part in the 23rd meeting of the Commission on Interparliamentary Cooperation with the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, which is supposed to take place in Moscow. The reasons for this are demonstrative, targeted, and unlawful acts of murder and acts of violence against Azerbaijanis, committed by law enforcement agencies on the ethnic soil in the city of Yekaterinburg of the Russian Federation. As well as the regular nature of such cases in recent times, it is said in the statement of the agency. The former Ministry of Culture of Azerbaijan announced the cancellation of all cultural events related to Russia, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan launched a protest against Russia for the events in Yekaterinburg on June 27. According to Baku, during a forceful operation, Russian law enforcement officers brutally killed 2 Azerbaijanis, seriously injured several people, and detained 9. Meanwhile, the court just arrested the detainees in Yekaterinburg and Azerbaijanis. The Azerbaijani state agency compared the situation in Russia with Germany in the 30s. On Sunday, yesterday in Yekaterinburg, arrests of detained Azerbaijanis began. On the footage from the courtroom, at least one of the detainees has visible injuries similar to bruises. The arrest proves that Russia did not recognize the mistake that occurred on Friday in the raid with bruises, which ended with the death of at least 2 Azerbaijanis. Baku demanded to conduct an immediate investigation. On Sunday, it became clear that the diplomatic crisis between the 2 countries was growing. Azerbaijani authorities have already cancelled all cultural events in the country, the organization of which was occupied by Russia or which had relations with the Russians. It reminds the agencies, when I say all, I mean all, including the performance of Basta and many other things. Actually, yesterday, the Leninsky District Court of Yekaterinburg sent under arrest. Until July 19, arrested on Friday Mazahir, Akif, and Ayaz Safarov. At least one of them, Mazahir, is charged with the murder of a committed or organized group of people. According to a preliminary report, according to the press service of the court in the Sverdlovsk region, Mazahir Safarov, according to the investigation, was a member of an ethnic criminal group involved in a number of episodes of murder and attempted murder in Yekaterinburg in 2001, 2010, and 2011. Judge Mazahir stated that he was strongly beaten up when detained. He writes from the building E1, RU. According to him, security guards broke his ribs. On the face of Ayaz Safarov, on the footage from the court hall published by the Caliber newspaper, hematomas are visible. Ayaz, as the newspaper writes, stated in court that he fell himself before being detained. During the decision to ban the release, the newspaper gathered representatives of the Azerbaijani diaspora from Yekaterinburg, E1, RU reported. Also, the accusations against Bakirov, Safarov, and Lyman Gangiev were reported by the Azerbaijani newspaper APA. Another person, Kemal Safarov, was taken to the emergency room. The person in the hospital is also detained on Saturday in Aziz Sabrasov, reported by APA. Even before the resolution to ban the Azerbaijan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he stated that all cultural events planned to be held in Azerbaijan with the participation of state and private institutions of Russia, including concerts, festivals, shows, exhibitions, and others, are cancelled. The statement says that in recent times, cases of demonstrative, intentional, and illegal killings and acts of violence committed by Russian law enforcement agencies against Azerbaijanis by ethnic origin have acquired a systematic character. On the evening of Saturday, the Azerbaijani State Information Agency, Azertaj, published a material comparing the situation in Russia with Germany in the 1930s. The domestic policy conducted today in Russia resembles Germany in the 1930s. The publication also says that if Moscow wants to continue regional cooperation and partnership, it is necessary to first of all refuse such an hostile approach to countries, which it calls allies. Mass raid on the places of residence and work of the Azerbaijani and Yekaterinburg security forces was conducted on Friday. As reported by E1, more than 50 people were detained. All the detained brothers and cousins, wrote APO, no less than 2 people were killed following the statements of the Azerbaijani media. At the same time, the Azerbaijani newspaper Modern, AZ, wrote about 5 people who died, and E1, RU, reported about 1 person who died. Safarova and others who were detained by security forces during the raid, then released, said that during the detention of their loved ones, they were beaten with their feet by the head of the floor and an electric shocker. A big scandal which does not think to calm down. On the contrary, it is growing more and more. Again, I don't know if it is necessary to say this or not. Like, law enforcement agencies have the right to detain suspects in certain crimes, especially in attempted murders in principle, in murders. But law enforcement agencies do not have, if there is no resistance, the right to apply force to beat up. Moreover, even if you look at the logic itself, that is, if there are people who were eventually released but who at the same time were beaten when detained, then it turns out that they beat innocent people. They tortured innocent people. Therefore, the indignation of Azerbaijan is quite legitimate. I have repeatedly told you that in Russia hatred has become a state idea, that national and interethnic contradictions are gaining momentum, that this is the second most popular topic for military corps after the war, and that it will inevitably lead to pogroms, beatings, mutual, let's say, cuts, all kinds of things. In general, all this will only gain momentum, and in different points of tension, this is one of them, and this is the consequence of one of them. If you cut the terrorist's ear after a croak, then, conducting a raid, you knock out the electroshock of innocent people and beat them with your head on the floor. This is how it works. No, some people may have been guilty there, it will be proven at home, everything is like that, but in any case, in the absence of resistance. Use, moreover, mass beatings, special forces, and so on, well, you just can't do that, it's inhumane, it has nothing to do with morality. I'm telling you, we're talking about Russia, which kills people every day, both on the territory of the country, that is, a foreign country, and on the territory of the country itself, so there's nothing to consider morality here. For us, the most important thing here is, of course, the split between Russia and Azerbaijan, because this is not one of the key allies, but this is an important ally in the orbit of Russia. And the further, the more Russia has become an ally. Moreover, there is Armenia and Azerbaijan. These are two opposing sides, if you can say so, and Russia threw Armenia under the agreement with Azerbaijan, and now, in fact, it is fighting with Azerbaijan, and there is nothing to do with Armenia. So, well, it's her choice. Other partners of Russia also have big issues with them, yes, because the basic one in Russia is one friend. And this is North Korea, but before that, as you remember, a lot was discussed about the creation of a new axis of evil, new countries of the axis. This is Russia, China, and Iran. But here not everything is so unambiguous. The interests and relations of Russia with other partners gain an interesting color. Axis of Iran, China, Russia is collapsing, writes the Atlantic edition. The edition came to such a conclusion, analyzing the events when Israel, then the United States, made a blow to Iran, and the reaction of China and Russia as the right turned out to be surprisingly restrained. Over the years, the general hostility towards the United States united China, Russia, and Iran. It is beneficial for all three of them to put the West in an awkward position in Ukraine, in the Middle East, as well as to increase the gap between Washington and Europe. Therefore, after the first strike of Israel on June 13, it was possible to expect that China, the strongest partner in the anti-American triad, would hasten to put Iran on the missile of low range and other means of air defense. Instead, China acted carefully only on a diplomatic level, and when the Iranian parliament voted for the closure of the Armenian Strait, Beijing made it clear that this should not be done. China's soft reaction is not just a blow to Iran, it can also mean that the partnership between Xi and Putin may not be as strong as Moscow and Beijing want to show. Beijing's response to the difficult situation in Iran should make the West feel careful optimism. If Donald Trump finally learns to distinguish the aggressor from the victim, or understands that Putin is playing with him, the President of the United States can support Ukraine seriously, not particularly worrying that China is expanding its assistance to Russia, writes Atlantic. The publication emphasizes that while Iran and Russia continue to supply cheap oil, set up the West against itself and its allies, they serve the purpose of China. At least at the moment, Beijing is unlikely to support one of its supposed partners if they pose a threat to the interests of China and stability or its extensive and profitable relations with the West. Let me remind you that China's cyber operations against Russia and what the FSB considers to be a strategic enemy of the West have recently become known. I've made a video about it, check it out if you missed it. Well, at the moment when, let's say, the ethnic component in Russia is very accelerated, and there are a large number of people who have really been taught to hate everyone around, including people who are different from them. In the Chechen Republic, they continue to focus their attention on class hatred, and class hatred on thieves. The wedding of Ramzan Kadyrov's son looked quite specific. A sanctioned Mercedes, a watch for $500 million, and a gunshot. 17-year-old Adam Kadyrov, the son of the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, played the wedding in his native village of Akhmat-Yurt, Astor writes. According to the eldest daughter of Kadyrov, Aishat, the daughter-in-law of Medni from the same village, high-ranking guests from the Middle East were among the guests, including the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates of Russia. We didn't personally congratulate Adam Kadyrov on his marriage, but I talked about this yesterday and reported about it on my Telegram channel, Ramzan Kadyrov, or who leads it there. However, according to the agency, the photo with congratulations was probably taken on June 11 in Putin's office in the Senate Palace. In social networks and the media, photos and videos of Adam Kadyrov appeared, and a limited Mercedes-Benz G-Class stronger than the 1980s in the color of agave was printed on the steering wheel. In short, the point is that only 460 copies of such cars have been produced. Delivery to Russia has been prohibited since March 22 due to the sanction of its luxurious car. In Germany, the price of such a car starts at 160,000 euros. Insider draws attention to the fact that dealers strictly register buyers in countries where deliveries go, which makes the appearance of such a Mercedes in Chechnya noticeable. At his wedding, Adam also demonstrated the Chechen Jacob & Co. from the unique series Billionaire Ashoka, worth about 550 million rubles. Well, and as you understand, I will remind you, if you suddenly forget, Chechnya is one of the most dotational and poor regions in Russia. That is, the federal center regularly sends a huge amount of money to Chechnya, and this money goes not to the well-being of Chechnya, but to the wallet of Ramzan personally Kadyrov, who distributes it to his children, to his endless wives, to his brother-in-law, and to everyone else. Therefore, for the hours of Adam Kadyrov, for the Mercedes of Adam Kadyrov, you pay. Yes, and when some claims are made that someone has violated the law somewhere, remember that Adam Kadyrov constantly violates his own existence. He is driving a car that violates the law, he is 17 years old, he shoots from a gun into the air from Stakino. And according to the records, it can be seen that this is not an imitation of a weapon, this is a real gun. The wearing of such a gun, moreover, is not perfect. Moreover, its combat use, well, that is, when you start to fire, not in a shooting range, not in a special place, this is all. You used weapons in ordinary life, which, I remind you again, cannot have and wear Adam Kadyrov, because in Russia you cannot have and wear pistols, except for people on certain positions. Adam Kadyrov has positions, but according to the law he cannot take them, he is still 17 years old. Well, you can see there that this is just a teenager who has not formed. Well, plus there is clearly some kind of stupidity written on his face, but this is already my assessment. That's why Adam Kadyrov violates the law, beats up people as it was with Nikita Zhuravel, and in fact, all his toys are bought for your money. That's the Russian world. Well, while Adam Kadyrov is having fun with the Mercedes and the watch that Russians buy him, I will remind you that we continue to collect money for Ukrainian units, which are right now fighting and fighting not for anything, but fighting for their homeland, for relatives and loved ones, for their relatives, for their parents, and they protect Ukraine every day, risking and giving their lives. Therefore, we, of course, continue to help them. Today we have a mobile complex RZO on the basis of a powerful pickup for the destruction of the occupant. And you know, when we discuss that there are some people who are like this, I will never donate weapons, only for evacuation, everything is like this. So if there are still such people among my viewers, although I don't understand how you can be among my viewers because this is an illogical and strange position which we have talked about many times. But if there are such people, then don't donate today, because today this thing is directly for the destruction of enemies. Actually, let's watch the video from this unit. They just show how this weapon works. We want to call again for help in the purchase of a mobile RCZV based on a powerful pickup. This technique will make our intelligence more effective and effective for the Russian occupant.
Слава Україні!
Glory, glory, here is a QR code for Monobank in the description of Monobank, PayPal, private and various cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, USDT, TC20, Ethereum. In general, let's help Ukrainians, Ukrainian units to close the assembly and destroy the enemy, defend our country. Analysts from Cyberborashno show traces of the destruction of Russian planes in the pictures, confirming the SBU's message. On satellite images from June 29, the results of a successful attack on the Russian airfield were recorded. As reported by the SBU, two Su-34 planes, two more damaged, were completely destroyed. Traces of a probable detonation of suspension weapons are visible on the spot of one of the planes. This moment on the image is marked in yellow. For comparison, pictures of the sanctuary from June 25 confirm that it was in this place that the group of planes was previously based. Zelensky signed a decree on the exit of Ukraine from the TAF Convention on the prohibition of anti-missile mines. The deputy of the Verkhovna Rada, Roman Kostinko, said, "This is a step that has long been required by the reality of the war. Russia is not a part of this convention. It uses mines against our military and civilian. We cannot remain connected when the enemy does not have restrictions," he wrote. And this is true. Any convention makes sense if it is signed by everyone and makes no sense if it is not so. Because in fact, some countries take voluntary restrictions, reducing their defensive potential, and in this case especially since anti-missile mines are almost always about defense. And there are no such things. As a result, as in the case with international law, we have a stupid situation. The aggressor replaces what he wants and how he wants the defending country and the victim of the aggression with the framework of international law and the convention that he signed. This is nonsense. This cannot be. Therefore, well, it seems to me that it is necessary to introduce a system under which, automatically, if aggression is committed on the country, it is freed from any restrictions related to international law and signed conventions. Not because I am for torture or something like that. No, torture is normal, and everything related to torture is a normal restriction. For example, the rule is not to use gas or any chemical by digging, not to use cassette ammunition, blah blah blah, and everything related to this. These are effective combat instruments. And in fact, their ban is associated with certain historical events when it generated either super big tortures from soldiers, from combatants, or very large destructions. But the problem is that when there is an aggressor who did not sign under all these things or signed but violates them, well, that's it. What can then be said about the compliance of these rules from the side of the victim who is defended, especially when there are several times more aggressors, as in the case of Russia and Ukraine? In general, you know my position, I have long been stung by this. I am very glad that Ukraine came out of this. Although, for the sake of justice, Ukraine uses anti-mine and makes it effective. And well, I have a lot of memes about this topic on the internet now. Terrible and humiliating at the same time plot came out on the Russian channel, from which you can learn a lot about the actions of the OSU. A Russian propagandist came to the occupied part of the Kherson region. There she asked the locals what to do if you see a drone. The answer, as they say, killed. At first, residents meet with caution. They have journalists for the first time in a long month, but kindly give advice. When you get up, you stop and stand. You just need to run away from the locals. So you have to stop, right? Yes. Advice from the locals, that's how you have to walk around the alleys. But in fact, a lot of things become clear from the answer. For example, that the OSU does not attack peaceful residents. The drone sees that it is about civilian and does not attack. This conclusion can be made from the fact that the local resident says to freeze when you see the drone. The fact is that there is no point in freezing because it is about FPV drones that transmit images. Therefore, the operator can perfectly see a running person and a standing person. This means that drones do not attack local residents, otherwise they would clearly recommend another tactic, because if you just freeze when the drone flies, it will kill you if the operator considers that you are a legitimate target. But this advice will not help propagandists at all. As you can see, the girl wears an armor vest and a helmet, or rather a helmet which visually makes her indistinguishable from the combatant. You rightly note that her armor has a patch press in front. Here is a small one, but the problem may be to see it. There are no recognizable patches on the back. You can see this at the end of the story. I specifically looked at it. The same on the helmet. It is likely that the operator will notice this tiny patch in front, if not poured, then extremely low. That is why in military conflicts and in the field of combat actions, journalists use helmets and bulletproof vests of special colors with large inscriptions, so that it can be noticed that they are not combatants. In short, when the propagandist dies in the form of a drone, the probability that she will die is extremely high. Someone can assume that the local resident, the settlement of which Russia occupied, gives such recommendations on purpose. This is not excluded. But in general, this plot is not so funny, but scary. It reminds us that a huge number of people continue to live under occupation. Someone lives under Russian occupation, someone lives in the outskirts of cities in which Russia strikes drones every day. Someone lives in Ukrainian cities where missiles and bombs fly. This is a monstrous war which is neither in arrows nor in numbers nor in all this. This is not a game, this is not a movie. This is a real reality in which a huge number of people risk not to wake up or die every day at the moment of awakening. This is monstrous and we must remember about it. Another layer of this monstrous war is the torture of Ukrainian military, who ended up in the Russian captivity. A soldier of the 79th Separate Assault Brigade, Andrei Pereverzev, who was burned to death in the Russian captivity. In an interview with the YouTube channel United24, Pereverzev told his story. He was tortured several times. A surgeon in a hospital in Donetsk burned Pereverzev with a medical soldering iron. Pereverzev was captured after a grenade exploded next to him. It was February 24, 2024. According to an open source, Pereverzev's unit took part in the battles for Novomikhailivka, which continued from the end of autumn of 1923 to the end of April 1924. During the assault on Novomikhailivka, Russia, according to military analysts, could lose more than 300 units of military equipment. Pereverzev asked the Russian military to bring him to the Russian positions. According to the Russian military, he was examined and hit several times with a 5-liter canister of water on his head. According to the Russian military, they welcomed him in such a way that he would not forget where he was. Later, Pereverzev was interrogated for torture. He was beaten with an open wound. This continued until the morning of the next day. Only after that, the man was sent to the hospital where he was operated on. According to the military, he was told that his urine bubble, ventral duct, and beep were torn apart from the explosion. A part of the beep was removed. After the operation, he was transferred to the emergency room, where he stayed for 2 more days. There he learned about the inscription which was carved out on his body. Ukrainian military was told about a nurse who said, "Don't worry, when you get home, you can close her tattoo or something else." Pereverzev noted that at that moment he had no idea what she was talking about, and for the first time he saw the inscription only a week later when he was transferred to an ordinary ward. When Pereverzev saw the inscription, he said, "You bastards, I'll kill you all." After that, he was beaten up again. One of the men who changed his bandage pricked his wounds with his finger to cause him pain. The military reported that the inscription on his body was made by the first surgeon who operated on him with the help of a medical soldering iron. Later, Pereverzev had to go through another torture in the hospital, which, according to him, were for entertainment. He told that he was followed by a man in balaclavas, none of whom was present. The prisoners were taken to a room where one man was typing on his laptop and the other one was torturing Pereverzev. According to his words, they hit him in the neck area on the back of the head and used an electric shocker. They asked, "Where am I wounded?" I said, "In the leg." They began to beat the electric shocker in the leg, said Pereverzev, showing traces of blows. Another torture was that he was rubbed with great effort with a towel face in the area of the beard, because of which the skin began to peel off. Torture lasted for 40 minutes. According to Pereverzev, other prisoners were also tortured in the hospital. After Pereverzev stood on his feet, he was sent from Donetsk to a colony in Torres, said the military and armed forces of Ukraine. On the day of his arrival in the colony, the prisoners of war, according to Pereverzev, carried out a series of security guards with batons. The guards were beaten with batons if a person walked slowly, Pereverzev said. According to his words, the batons were applied to another prisoner who had a leg injury. The man was killed until he fell, Pereverzev said. Pereverzev doesn't remember anything. For example, in Belarus during the protests, they detained people and carried them through the same line of security with batons. 1 or 2 hits, according to Pereverzev, were received by other prisoners. Pereverzev says that before their arrival in the colony, the reception of the prisoners of war was even more cruel. The prisoners of war were met not by the guards of the colony, but by the special forces who beat everyone. Pereverzev was released in the course of the exchange at the end of May. According to the military, on May 22, he and other Ukrainian prisoners of war were brought to Rostov-on-Don, where planes were delivered to the exchange area. Pereverzev returned to Ukraine on May 24, according to a photo published by Dmitry Lebyansov. Authorized by the Human Rights Commission in Ukraine, Pereverzev stated that he wanted to return to the front if the doctors allowed him. Let me remind you that almost all Ukrainian prisoners of war, 95%, are tortured in Russia. This is the data of the head of the UN Monitoring Commission on Human Rights in Kiev, Danila Bela. And it is very important to understand what the Ukrainian war is going through, so whatever happens there, I am always happy with any exchange, because I can't imagine what the Ukrainian military is going through, but I know that this is a real hell. Unlike the Russian military in the Ukrainian captivity, where they feel great, they are fed, treated, they come out rosy, without wounds, without anything. That's why this is, of course, a separate monstrous page of this war. This war has a lot of monstrous pages, and it is important to remember about it. It is important to remember about it every day. Ukrainian military from the 20th Separate Regiment of the K2 unmanned systems say that they captured 2 citizens of Cameroon. The video from the capture was published in the Facebook section. The documents were not shown. In the footage, two men speak English with a Ukrainian audio track on top, which arrived in Russia with peaceful purposes, one to work at a shampoo factory, the other as a translator to treat teeth. However, it is said that they were met at the airport and they were on the front line for the promised 1,100,000 rubles. According to the K2 statement, the cameramen were captured as a result of a joint operation with the 118th Brigade of the Territorial Defense and two battalions of the 54th MBR. The first is the shooter and the first is mechanized. And now a little more about what is happening on the front line. A new analysis of Konstantin Mashchev came out. In some areas, let's get acquainted with him. Let's start with the Sumy direction. Mashchev admits that there is no success for the Russians there for several days. However, he emphasizes that it is too early to say that the offensive has stopped since Russian armed forces continues to attack and attempt to storm. According to him, at any moment the situation may change, given that Russian armed forces can draw up reserves or take some other actions that will allow the Russian troops to move forward. The command of the Russian troops north by the forces of its Kurdish group, the troops continue to try to expand the encirclement in the border zone of the Sumy region of Ukraine. At the same time, during the last 3 days, despite the active assault actions of its forward units, it still cannot achieve any significant results, even on a tactical level. In particular, Russia tried to break through from the east to the west through the road of Elizaveta-Kaitin, as well as in the direction of Alexievka-Malaya-Krychovka.
Результата это не дало. Судя по всему, закрепившиеся в ранее отбитые ими Андреевки подразделения вооруженных сил Украины и обороняющиеся к западу от Кондратовки успешно препятствуют дальнейшему продвижению российских войск на этих направлениях, имея возможность наносить огневое поражение противнику на флангах его боевых порядков.
Units of the armed forces of Ukraine, which defended the west from Kondratovka, successfully prevented the further advance of the Russian troops. These directions having the opportunity to inflict a fire strike on enemy on the flanks of his combat positions. The assault units of Russian armed forces continue to attack from the outskirts of Novoniklivka, Yablanovka in the direction of Novoniklivka-Vorchno and Yablanov-Kravchino. They do not have the results yet, although they have been strengthening this direction during the last week with separate units of the 18th Fire Brigade Division. The main forces of the 76th Assault Division have been fighting here. At the moment, Russia does not have any success in this direction, although it continues to hold the northern part of Unikovka. We are protecting the city of Lochnia by the battle and managed to cross the road of Unikovka-Sumy. It holds one position to the south of the road, to the east of the Unikovsky district of the GPP, Sumy Gas, he writes. The situation in the area of the settlement of Tyokhanarskaya Oblast, where the Ukrainian armed forces actually bypassed the units of the 56th Descent and Assault Regiment of Russia, the Sabivo flanks, as well as in the direction of the state hydrological station, Alexandrovskaya. Yarapol, where the VSRF is trying to break through the state borders of the country. Thus, in connection with the last loud statements of a number of Ukrainian officials and semi-official officials, says the marshal and representatives of a certain stop of the Russian offensive in the Sumy direction, I am forced to state that there are at least two factors in this area, he writes. We can only talk about the establishment of the offensive when it goes from it to the defense in the entire operational direction. It is obvious that this does not happen in the Sumy direction yet. Russia continues to attack, storm, and immediately on several sites. In this context, we can only talk about the absence of the results of these attempts. In this regard, it can be stated that in the last 3 or 5 days it is really either minimal or absent at all. The reason for this is also quite clear, writes Mashchev, a decrease in the combat capabilities of the front units of Russia as a result of significant losses caused by them during the offensive, which organized and led the command of the FSRF in the Sumy direction. However, in this regard, it should be said that this phenomenon may be temporary, which will continue until the regroupation of additional forces and funds of Russia in this direction, or until its front units are in a significant volume in full capacity. In the meantime, it is too early to talk about a full stop or any blocking of the Russian offensive in the Samsky direction, says Mashchev. What can I add for myself here? The answer to the question whether the offensive has been stopped depends on how you define all these words. If we assume that Russia has stopped attempts under the stop of the offensive, then yes, it is incorrect to say that the offensive has been stopped. However, then we will have to admit that the Russian offensive has not been stopped along the entire front line, which is almost half a year ago. If under the fact that Ukraine stopped the Russian offensive in the Sumy region, we assume that the Russian armed forces do not manage to advance, then yes, the offensive has been stopped. In any case, I think it is correct to say that the situation in this direction is stabilized for the defense forces. But I agree with Konstantin that everything can change, not only here, but in general everywhere, because war is a multi-factor story and every action and counteraction changes the whole picture. In any case, there are no reasons to relax. The flow of Russia continues. The war continues. The intensity of combat actions only increases. Therefore, if someone considers the stabilization of the front on Sumchina as something calming, then it is not necessary. Heavy bloody battles continue, where Ukraine loses its best people who stood up to defend its homeland. Let's talk separately about the crisis in the Kuban direction. Konstantin Mishevez notes that the crisis in the northern city of Kupiansk continues in the area of the enemy's bridgehead on the river Oskol. Earlier, the Russian command, having suddenly applied a number of assault units of the unit number 68 of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, managed to break through the bridgehead in the direction of Masyutovka, Kondratovka, and Kondrasheva-Golubovka, which is also on the outskirts. In addition, Russian armed forces actively used derision intelligence groups in this direction, which in some cases played the role of assault groups. At this moment, the front units of these forces and funds of the Russians are engaged in fierce battles in order to hold Kondrashevka and Golubovka, and are also trying to capture Radkovka, an attack in the southwest direction. Although the Russians have not yet managed to physically get on the road R79 in the area between Kupiansk and the village of Zapadnaya, it should be understood that it is not tightly controlled in terms of fire damage. Therefore, maneuvering by force along the front of the southern part of the Plasdarm of Russia is significantly more complicated for the VSU. In fact, from the front positions of the RF in the forest massif in the northeast of Radkovka to the northern outskirts of Kupiansk, 1.112 km from the front positions of Russian armed forces in the area of the settlement of Golubovka is up to 1.5 km. It is obvious that in the near future, the command of the RF army will try to develop its success in a tactical sense, namely, to take under full control the region of Malaya Shapkovka, Kondrashevka, Tishanovka, Balshia Shapkovka, and break through directly to the northern outskirts of Kupiansk, the area of the Moscow settlement. At least, Russia will try to attack from Golubovka to Radkovka, trying to take over the latter. So far, as of the evening of the 29th of the 26th. Writes Mashevitz in the SRF, it was not possible to completely take over Radkovka. The position of their forward units in the area of Kondrashevka, obviously, also does not contribute to their further advance in the western direction. Together with that, Mashevitz emphasizes the general situation in the Kupiansk direction, which is obviously very complicated for the armed forces of Ukraine, and for the last successes of Russia in its platform, from the front positions of Russian armed forces in the Golubovka region to the main communication, through which the main part of the material and technical support of the Ukrainian army group is carried out, which holds the platform to the east of the city of about 4.75 kilometers. Of course, it is difficult for Russia to carry a barrel-reactive artillery through a shrapnel to its platform, but to organize massive use of UAVs in this direction, especially to the south, to the direction of Kupiansk, and this communication is not difficult. I think that such an attempt from the USRF is already in the process of implementation. It is obvious that the Ukrainian command in this direction, for various reasons, did not take the opportunity to radically change the situation in its favor, at least in order to push the Russians away from the northern outskirts of the city. And finally, about the Lemensk direction in terms of what is happening on the front line. A group is heading west. The Russians continue to break through from their Darman base to the river Cherny Zherebets. At the same time, they are trying to unite with the left flank of the 1st Tank Army and turn the defensive Osu in the area of Kopin, Novogorovka, Drozhlyubovka, Chernishchina. Russian armed forces is clearly trying to go to the rear of our units defending along the northern coast of the river Seversky Donetsk, the Serebryansk forestry, and to make them retreat at least to the border beyond the river Yampol. So far, the command of Russia's 25th Army failed to achieve any significant results in this matter. However, it may well happen that the USU will have to retreat from this area for a different reason. As a result, the Russians are moving along the southern bank of the Severodonetsk River in the direction of Belogorovka-Serebryanka, in the area of the neighboring 3rd and the composition of the troops of the south. Well, as for the Russian military and especially the replenishment that the Russian army needs, the Parapax channel publishes a video of the Russian military that describes the life of those who are sent to war. Let's listen. I'm Evgeny Anatolievich Bugayev. I go to the ISVU. Here we are in such conditions as they contain. Look, the bars are like in prison. Look further. This is how we sleep. This is our bed. Here is the ISVU. This is our bed. We sleep on them. Here, look, please. This is the window. Here is another person without a leg in such conditions. Here is a person with a leg too, and these are our grills on the doors. Here is a person with a hand, and this is how we drink water. Here, look how much water we have. A lot. In general, a lot. Next, this is our toilet. We do not take it out because we are not allowed out of here. Excuse me, please take measures. We have not been eating for 3 days. We are not allowed out. We are such military. We are going to war to defend Russia. No details are specified, but regardless of whether they are former convicts or drunk, these are the conditions for the new elite, and they have not even reached the war. By the way, about the new elite. The soldier who ran away from the war killed a friend in the Smolensk region, as Astro found out. June 24, in the town of Velizh in the Smolensk region, the body of the killed resident of Kaluga was found. It was found out that the murder with a knife and for the conflict was committed by a 30-year-old soldier of the military unit 44740 for Dmitry Kavalenko. Astro found out Kavalenko was previously a judge for the robbery, took part in the invasion of the Russian Federation of Ukraine. However, at some point he fled from the war and was on the wanted list. The military was detained. The resident of the occupied Makiivka asked to protect her from the persecution of a former military man in Russian armed forces. According to the girl, he brought her to the field and threatened her with murder. A former resident of the 39-year-old military man, 114th Separate Guards of the Fire Brigade, the former Vostok Brigade, Alexei Kutsavalov, complained to the resident of Makiivka in the Donetsk region. The girl reported that the military was pursuing her as well as threatening her with murder. It turned out that one of the men took the girl to the field and promised to kill her. Then she turned to the occupation forces for help, but the local authorities did not respond to the situation, Astro found out. As Astro managed to establish, sent to the database, Kutsavalov was born in the Donetsk region of Ukraine. For some time he lived in the Kharkov region and was previously a judge in Ukraine, including for theft and theft. Well, in the end, I want to remind you that Russian cemeteries in all regions swell with incredible speed. And despite the fact that Russia is hiding its losses as much as possible, prohibiting filming and so on, there are so many graves that they break through into the form of space. This is just a part of the cemetery in the Novosibirsk region with fresh graves.
И чем дольше идет эта война, чем больше Владимир Путин отправляет людей.
In order for them to kill Ukrainians and die themselves, the more the cemetery will be, the more monstrous the consequences will be for their relatives, for cities, for villages. If they survive, there will be problems with the fact that they will return and will be killed. If they die, then relatives and loved ones will lose someone who feeds them, someone else. This war destroys not only Ukraine, this war destroys Russia, its military potential, its geopolitical potential. And what is most important, because the two previous ones have no sense if the state is beep, is the well-being of people, their ability to live normally, and so on. By supporting all this, you prolong this war. By standing up against this both internally and externally, you are approaching the moment when this war will be stopped. Well, Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best. Bye.